Hi there, everybody, and welcome to episode 248 of the Art of Procurement. As always, I am your host, Philip Eidson, and today is the next in a number of conversations I recorded live a few weeks ago. Comes from ProcureCon Indirect East, and in this one, I sit down with Lawrence Kane. Lawrence was recently crowned the SIG Sourcing Supernova Hall of Famer, which is a little bit of a mouthful, and he is also a senior leader of strategic sourcing functional excellence and first-time quality for a Fortune 50 company. So in today's conversation, we focus on how procurement leaders, and the how is very important, can actually enable innovation from suppliers or from potential suppliers. We cover a number of topics today in the conversation, including the critical role of governance and contracts in innovation, and the balance between savings and innovation, and the need to invest in one without sacrificing the other. Now, this is Lawrence's second appearance on the pod, so I skipped my traditional first question. In fact, if you want to know how Lawrence got into procurement and if it chose Lawrence or if Lawrence chose procurement, you'll need to listen in to episode 164. Instead, and to provide context for the rest of the conversation, I asked Lawrence to start with if he could actually define what innovation means to him.
So that's one of those words like benchmark, right? That it can mean lots of different things. To make it a actually usable, actionable term, innovation to me really just means solving an unmet business need. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of ways to do that. Yeah. And the reason to define it that way is to make sure we're not talking about cool technology for technology's sake. We're talking about bringing in something that we haven't done before to solve a problem that we couldn't figure out how to do.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, when a lot of times you think about technology, you think about wonderful new products, wonderful new technologies. It doesn't need to be as complex as that because it could just be, looking at business model innovation, for example.
Sure.
It's just so many different layers of innovation.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just a silly example of that. So we had a telco contract years ago where it was in a downturn in the economy. We had a huge cost savings target. We did a competitive bid, and one of the suppliers said, if you buy mobility and audio conferencing and a bunch of other services together, well, the minutes that you use, we can determine whether they count or not. So if you use our mobile phone to call our audio conferencing service, guess what? We'll make those minutes free. Mm-hmm. And that was really unique innovation in the pricing model. It saved us hundreds of millions of dollars. Right. And that's what eventually became the Unity plan that supplier, I've probably given away who it is, but that supplier made as a general offering to everybody. Yeah. But it started with us because we had market leverage. They didn't have other big deals at the time. They really needed to look outside the box. And they're like, well, gee, this is a win-win because it doesn't actually cost us anything extra. Right. And
just
to
thinking
us,
about a different way of going about, commercial models.
Exactly. And so innovation can be all kinds of different things. It can be, people, process, technology, tools, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's really about the business challenge. In the case, of the telco thing, it was the fact that we had affordability issues in a downturn economy, and we had to save money in sort of commodity space. And that was a great example of one where we were able to save a ton of money. There was actually not something where it was beat the supplier up for a lower price, but rather adding value, which gave them a bigger buy, and it gave us better service.
You talked about people, process, technology.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's one of those that's usually the spur of innovation, or is it very situational?
It is situational, but I think it really starts with people, right? Because you have to understand the business to know what the unmet business need is, right? So the better, let's say you're a supplier and you're running around in our ecosystem, the better you can understand what we do. So remember, IT, I work in IT sourcing and procurement. Mm-hmm. IT is there in order to enable the business. So you have to understand the business strategy, how that flows into an IT strategy, flows into a service strategy, flows into a procurement strategy, right? And the procurement strategy includes, among other things, the sourcing strategy, right? So in order to do that, it all starts with the business and kind of ends with the business. So all IT needs to be valuable from the perspective of the folks who build products and services that actually make money, because we're an overhead function. Mm-hmm. So if you understand the business and how IT can enable the business, you can figure out the right everything else So really, to me, it has to start with the person, because that's something that you can't automate. You can't, despite the fact that people say AI is real, it's really machine learning, right? There really isn't AI.
Right.
So, at least until there is, right now it's all people. Eventually, maybe it's a computer, but today it's a person.
Now, do you feel like, because in my experience, I found you often find new technology or find something new and you try and find a way to back that into your category strategy, let's say, without really taking it the other way, which is, like you say, understand the unmet business need, to figure out if there's actually a need for whatever this innovation may be. Like, how are you encouraging your team to think about understanding what it is that the unmet business needs are?
So we do a lot of things. There's an old term in continuous improvement from the Japanese model, Kaizen, which is continuous improvement, called a Gemba walk, which is, Gemba is where the things happen, right? So you go out and walk through the factory and figure out, how is the technology being used, what does it enable, and so on. And so really we encourage people to get to be very knowledgeable in not only what their IT business partners do for a living, but also what their customers, their internal, I don't mean customer of the checkbook, I mean, the internal folk, what they do. Because oftentimes you can see this cool technology and you can't figure out how to use it well. Think the classic, the Post-it note, right? Once they figured out how to use it, that was $1 billion idea, right? But until then, it's, why do I need glue that doesn't really stick very good, right? Yeah, well, it's not only that, doesn't even stick very well. Yeah. But guess what? There's a great use for that. So it's okay to have a pulse on the technology when you don't know what it does, and keep that in mind as you're going through the various business strategy to say, we need to do X. I remember this technology thing, maybe that's got a role, right? And part of it also is knowing that oftentimes the suppliers actually know more than we do. Yeah. And so we got to ask them. And there's, different types of suppliers. You think of a stratification model, right? There's the kind of business partner type suppliers that's almost a joint venture level, right? And then there's kind of everybody else, and there's layers and stratification. Well, if those ones who are in that kind of business partner level, whatever you decide to call it, if they aren't bringing innovative ideas in, there's a real problem. I don't mean just having a gain sharing or incentive clause or whatever in the contract. I mean actually as part of the governance process, they understand your business and they go, hey, we have this thing that we did for this other company. I think it maybe applies here. Let's talk. That's really important, right? To encourage them to do that and to actually open-mindedly listen and find out maybe this is a good idea.
Listening is so important, because I think we often miss that. We have suppliers who will share, because generally speaking, I mean, that's what suppliers love to do. They want to share their innovations with you, unless they hate you and they're just trying to take you for whatever money you've got, which, maybe they've done their segmentation model and that's where you fit. But the vast majority of suppliers want to share because they're looking at ways to expand the business. But then we don't listen, and so then they just stop sharing.
That's common. I actually find a lot of times that they get a little lazy. And so, you'll have somebody come in and talk about the cool technology because they're a software company or whatever. And okay, that's nice, but how would I use that? And so it's kind of a two-way street, right? If you have really good governance, if you have long-term, strategic advantage type relationships, so talking classic outsourcing, maybe even vested deals, if you have that kind of thing, it should be a natural outcome of the governance process that makes that happen. And part of that includes sharing technology strategies and roadmaps at a very senior level. Yeah. So our chief technology officer, our CIO, whomever, maybe spending some time, maybe it's only once or twice a year, but spending some time with these suppliers, and they're spending a lot more time with our architects. So they understand, where are we trying to go, what are we trying to accomplish, and how does wherever their technology strategy is, align with that. And it gives the opportunity to have a real advantage. And you think about, just a really old example, Microsoft is right down the street from where I work. And when they came up with this whole Outlook Exchange thing, basically, a commercial business grade email, well, we were one of the first customers. And we took it in and we tried to make it work, and we actually broke it because it couldn't scale to our level. So we actually sent engineers, software engineers, to Microsoft to work with them to go and figure out ways to implement and fix that. Well, that's us as a customer helping them out.
Yeah.
And what did they do for us? Well, that negotiation for our new software license agreement took about 30 seconds.
Yeah, it was
right?
a much easier discussion, wasn't it?
Right, because we had a very different relationship. Now that was it was probably 20 years ago now. Yeah. But the point is
that the spirit of the larger relationship, and you're doing that for each other.
Exactly right. We're seeing the value in each other's business. Maybe we can help you test something to scale because we're big, or maybe we can help you identify gaps and do a go-to-market, but we get an exclusive use of the IP for a certain amount of time so we can get ahead of our competitors, whatever, right? Yeah. So it's kind of a win-win for both companies when you do those relationships right. When you don't, if it's, me buyer or you supplier, well, who's really going to offer up innovation in an environment like that? So if it's a commodity, maybe that's cool. But if we expect more from the supplier, both sides really have to operate a little bit differently. And again, that gets back down to people, right?
Right. How do you help kind of manage that interaction between supplier and ultimately the people within your business with whom they would be supporting or developing new solutions to help? Because we often kind of create this barrier where either it's through fear because we feel that if a supplier is talking to somebody within our business, it's going to turn around in 6 months' time to be a scope or a statement of work or a design drawing or whatever that's basically designed for that product, and we haven't had any engagement. But that being said, you're going to stymie innovation pretty quickly if all you're doing is taking the best IP from suppliers and turning it around into something that you then put out to the market.
Oh, exactly. So, part of it is having kind of a hand-in-glove relationship. So our sourcing and vendor management team, sourcing is the upfront strategy stuff, then we go through procurement, and then we do vendor management to manage on the back end, right? We have consistency across that. It's all one organization. It used to be different. Mm-hmm. And when you stovepipe that, it's a challenge, right? So one of the things that I was able to accomplish several years ago was making that connection there, so the people who are coming up with the strategy and negotiating the deals are usually the same people who are managing on the back end, or at least they're in the same team, right? Yeah. Reporting to similar places. So when you do that, what it allows is it allows you to really have a better understanding of why are we doing this, what's the unmet business need that we're hiring these folks for in the first place, and then how do we govern through the sourcing life cycle to make sure that they have the opportunities to bring forward these ideas and that they're vetted appropriately, and if it makes sense, we do something, and if it doesn't, we don't. And we kind of steer the witness a little bit, right? Here's the kind of things that we're looking for. Here's how you could help. Not necessarily telling them what to do directly, but rather helping them understand, here's where we see you fit within our stratification model and our supplier ecosystem. Yeah. So pay attention to this area and maybe this other area. We've already got that covered. Don't waste your time, right? And so when we do that, the conversations are a lot meatier and more value added, because they're kind of knowing, which tree to be barking up, right? Yeah. Because you can't. I mean, no supplier is going to have everything. We have where I work, we have 1,834 suppliers in IT. About 80% of the spend is in roughly 40 of them, and 90% in roughly 400. Right. So if you're in that 400. Great. If you're in the 40, even better. Yeah. If you're elsewhere,
it's a long tail.
Yeah, it's a long tail, but we're probably not going to be having the same conversations with the tail that we are, with the big players. But the big players earn their way to being big players, right? It's not just they have good stuff that is valuable. They also behave in certain ways. So it's a self-reinforcing kind of thing where you have strategic suppliers, you actually treat them like they're strategic, and then they continue to act in innovative ways.
Yeah. Now, if you have a member that, a supplier within that tail, because people, they go, it's not unheard of to go from a tail supplier to obviously one of the most core strategic suppliers.
Of course, yeah.
But when you're in the tail, it's harder sometimes to get the attention.
Right.
How, if you're giving advice to a tail supplier, how, if they have innovation, do they actually get that in front of you?
Yeah, so that's a great, everybody wants to know that, right? But it's a great question because a lot of people come with a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah.
This is what we do. This is why it's so awesome. This is how we compare to our competition. Okay, that's interesting, but if you want to really have a meaningful conversation, here's something that you need to be fixed or made better or to innovate in or whatever it is, and here's how we can help you do that. It's not necessarily that different of a conversation at a nuance level, but it's a massively different conversation for meaning, right? Because you may have the most awesome widget in the world, but I don't need a widget. I need a, whatever, right? So it gets to the point of do your homework, understand why you're even a supplier in the first place. And when the opportunities come up, we do a very formal RFX process. And if somebody does an end around, that's going to be short-lived, right? They're probably not going to stay a supplier very long. So, you really got to work within the process. But in the process, there's all kinds of opportunities to innovate if you actually read carefully what we send out and listen to the bidders conference and that sort of thing. If we're looking for innovation, you'll know. If we're looking for commodity, you'll know. Right? And you can choose what to bid. You don't have to bid on everything. We're not necessarily the greatest customer in the world for some things. For other things, we're your bestest buddy. And so know where you're a good fit and where you're not a good fit. And the folks who are trying to win at any cost or trying to sell everything, you're going to have strengths and weaknesses. And if you spend a lot of energy on your weaknesses, just because you're trying to grow revenue a little bit, it's probably not going to end well. As opposed to if you work on your strength where it matches with our need, then all of a sudden, you're working from a very strategic perspective, and that's the kind of thing that's a good fit, right? So some things, you're a bestest buddy. That's how you get into the 40, right?
And as a buyer, you can see pretty easily through a spray and pray kind of approach where you have folks approaching you and, they're approaching you like they're approaching everybody else. They have no clue about your business.
I mean, I get probably 300 to 500 spam emails a day because unfortunately I speak at conferences a lot. They had the Hall of Fame thing last year. My name's all over the place. I'm on LinkedIn. People search me out and then without
salesperson's best friend.
But they just send stuff without. It's just boilerplate garbage. And it's like, would you at least check and see if this? Like, I got one today where they're trying to sell me contacts so that I can go sell to other companies. I don't sell anything. I buy stuff. I don't need that. It's not going to help you any. And oh, by the way, did you even look at my title? Because my title doesn't say anything about sales. And so that's one of the challenges that you get is you get people who are just shotgunning stuff. And that's a great way, even if you have a good solution to something, to never have the opportunity to provide it, right?
Because you just have negative perception.
And it's kind of funny because the lowest paid people in every organization seem to be the ones who have the most public contact. So, you go into a doctor's office and there's a receptionist or a nurse or whatever, right? You go into an auto dealership and you got, the clerk who takes your order for the maintenance bay or someone who does your appointment or whatever with the sales team. It's always the front end that is the lowest paid, sort of most oversight kind of position, and yet that's the most important because that's who people see as you first up, right? Like our service desk. When people call the service desk, what they see about IT is usually the service desk. They're already mad because something's not working, right? And so we had to craft a contract that motivated the service desk to do the right things around customer sat and solving the problem, as opposed to all the, micromanaging that's typically done in that kind of a space where you're looking at, average speed of answer, call handle time, to, blah, 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 right? Well, if you have the wrong metrics or you over constrain with metrics, SLAs, SLOs, OLS, blah, 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 right? If you do that, you're going to drive adverse behaviors, right? If you measure the right things, what gets measured gets done, and people act accordingly. And so it's a little of both sides, right? We need to be good buyers by crafting good statements of work that say what we want, not how to do it, and good
by
metrics.
An outcome.
Right, exactly. Good metrics that say what success looks like, and the suppliers need to provide good outcomes so that we're buying a result. You start to do things like that, unless you're talking about, COT software or something, right? But, when you're talking about something where that kind of thing matters, the better our requirements are and the better the suppliers understand those requirements, the more likely they are to win.
Well, what happens when a supplier is more innovative than the customers?
That can happen. And part of it is define customer, right? So give you an example. So BECU, Boeing Employees Credit Union, they were approached by one of their IT suppliers years and years ago, back in the days when the first few banks were going from brick and mortar banking to ATMs and web. And their supplier said, hey, we got this thing and it's awesome and you need to get in on it because all your competitors are going to do that. And their CFO was like, no, and their CPO was like, no. Because why? Because, well, it's a local credit union, right? Their whole thing is we're friends with our customers. They help own, they own a share of us, right? We're not out there trying to do this impersonal web thing. Plus, this web scares me because it's not secure, right? This is way back in the day. Yeah. And so, if the supplier had understood, there are ways for you to be customer centric and remote, maybe it could have worked. But even if they did, even if they brought that forward, the CPO wasn't influential enough on the board to be able to say, hey, we need to change our entire business model because of this thing from this IT supplier. Yeah. He would have gotten laughed out of the room, right? Because they weren't ready for it. And so it gets to your CPO or whoever it is that's getting the idea from the supplier, having enough influence with the people who actually make the decisions to A, know what innovation is, and B, be able to take advantage of it. Now, that particular supplier could have gone off in a hissy fit and well, fine, you don't appreciate me, and I'm like, right? Or they could have said, hey, I get it, you guys aren't ready. Yep. Let me check in 6 months or a year or whatever, right? Because eventually, obviously, they embrace that. And I haven't been to a physical branch of my bank in, God, I don't even know, probably 15 years. Yeah,
even the thought of doing it, you start cursing, why do I have to go to the bank?
Yeah, exactly. I can do everything I want to through remotely. But you know what? I still feel like a member of the credit union because of the way they do it. Yeah. So it's not become this barrier between the credit union and the customer. Instead, it's become an integration of this whole customer-centric approach, and this is just one channel get there. They still have brick-and-mortar locations. People still go there. I don't because it's not convenient. Right? But that doesn't mean you can't. Yeah. And, I've been a member for more than 40 years. Yeah.
And part of the value proposition is being available and it's the personal touch.
Exactly. And so
you just happen not to, to value other ways because you're valuing speed or convenience. But
Right. And I can get a hold of a human when I need to, which is rare, but when I do, it's usually something important. And I can get a hold of, the services I need remotely 24/7, right? So, maybe with occasional, outage window for maintenance or something. But the point is that,
That's the IT lead speaking there.
Yeah.
You're used to building that into your contracts for your outages.
Well, exactly. But the thing is that in the case, that I was describing and years ago, the IT supplier was more innovative than the bank was. Yeah. But they still ended up doing what they wanted to do. It just didn't happen at the time, right? So they didn't say, well, you guys are a lousy buyer and we're going to go to somebody else. No, they just bided their time and went, okay, these guys aren't ready yet. And as the rest of the industry started to evolve and change, going from brick and mortar banking to ATM and web was really transformational. Yeah. Completely changed the business model. So the folks who were late adopters because either they were, risk averse or they didn't understand it or, whatever reason, right? But eventually everybody had to adopt that. And so by the supplier biding their time and educating the customer, eventually they ended up with a very good relationship. And as a customer of that, I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah.
If they'd been an early adopter, I'm not sure I would have been happy with it because I know enough about IT to be really nervous about certain things being out there when they're not secure, right?
Yeah. So if I go on the flip side, thinking about, we talked earlier about, innovation is solving an unmet need in a new way. There's obviously a lot of opportunities as a procurement professionals to see opportunities for innovation across the business.
Right.
But certain stakeholders, certain business units are more receptive to innovation than others. Maybe it's because of the product, maybe it's just because of the culture of that business unit. Other things that maybe there's not a way to go and determine, where the best place is to start that journey, but are there flags or things that you look for that give you an indication, I think innovation is something that this area of the business is open to versus another area where, you kind of know that you're dead on your feet before you even start.
Right. So it really gets down to relationship and people, right? So, procurement's an overhead function. if we are really going to have a seat at the table, we need to add value, and we need to measure the right things. If all we're measuring in procurement is cost savings, we're probably never really going to have a seat at the table, right? Because you can't bring innovation in when all you care about is cost savings, because sometimes it requires an investment. Sometimes we start talking about value rather than cost, right? So yes, cost savings is important, but how does it rack and stack against the other things that are your metrics as an organization to identify what is it that you see of yourself, and what is it that your internal business partners, I call them business partners because to me a customer is a checkbook, right? So what do your business partners see as value in you? And so it could be speed to market, it could be innovation, it could be all kinds of things other than our traditional cost saving stuff. But it really gets down to the relationship. So if you have a category manager, for example, in some commodity space, let's just pick IT because we've been talking about IT, or you have whatever your engagement model is with your IT business partner, the better you can understand IT, the more technical you are, and the more business savvy you can be to speak to, here's opportunities that you in procurement understand that maybe somebody in IT doesn't understand. And demonstrate how you can make the CIO more valuable to the company, and how you can take and do value added and important things as a business partner. That's when you start to have those conversations. So really, the better respected you are by your constituency, the more chance you have to influence, right? Because you have to actually, right? And so you can. Just as a silly example, when I first started doing this, we didn't have an organization. I actually created the organization way back in the day. I was just some guy they called every time they had to deal with a supplier because things went better when I was in the room, right? Well, when you think about that, I kind of called it, I was the bestest buddy of the IT department, right? Because I could speak procurement and I could do certain things. Well, if you can do that as an organization, and everybody is that bestest buddy, now we start having really value-added conversations. I'm not just, plugging holes, right? I'm actually helping steer a little bit. And I can go in and, at any time I could go to our CIO and say, hey, I saw this thing this supplier has, and here's how it fits with something you're trying to do. Maybe we should talk to them. And there's probably going to be a good answer. And that's because I've spent a lot of time building up my personal credibility. Anybody on the team can do that, that's good at it, because we understand what it is that IT does to enable the business and how the supplier ecosystem supports that functionality. That's where you start to have those really good conversations. If you don't understand that, and if you don't have a track record, it makes it very, very hard. Right?
Now, when you have those conversations, do you find that, and you're starting to share some innovative ideas or technologies or whatever it is, business model, commercial models, do you find that the stakeholder or the business partner is already typically aware of that, or that we're bringing something to the table that they may not know?
They're usually aware of the technology because, let's face it, folks talk to their peers, right? So, our CIO is a friggin' genius. A really, really smart guy, talks to other CIOs, and if you go down into the VPs and so on down the food chain, she very much encourages people to get to know their peers and other companies, understand. What they don't necessarily know is procurement can look across multiple industries and organizations and can understand, kind of cost structure and pricing model and how ready for market things are and so on and so forth, as opposed to having a pure technology conversation. So think about something that's a buzzword like blockchain, right? So blockchain is going to save the world, and well, okay, in what capacity? Are we talking about bitcoins? Or are we talking about something in procurement? Well, oh, we're talking about procurement. Well, there's some really good value in blockchain and procurement, which would include things like, conflict minerals or things like, provenance of parts that have to pass inspections or whatever. That's a really valuable thing. But when you start looking at those commodity suppliers who create those parts, say things like, rivets or, little fasteners, things like that, right? Can they afford to actually have blockchain-enabled contracting because they have really low profit margins. Maybe there's a business case to be made for a large company who uses a lot of that to actually put the ecosystem in place
kind of funding the platform
and the infrastructure, right? So that all of your supply chain can be on that. Well, that starts to be a conversation that's not just a technology one; it's a business conversation, right? There's a business case that's a large. Maybe there's a TCO model far beyond one supplier. Maybe it's like 20 suppliers. Well, most IT people don't see that, right? It's not they don't understand blockchain. They probably understand it way more deeply than I do. I'm sure they do. And we got some pilots going on, and the folks who are doing that are a lot smarter than I am. But what they don't see is where's it been implemented not elsewhere? How are the companies are looking at performing in other locations? Are there appropriate contractual safeguards there? What does it do with the supplier ecosystem? What does it do with our supplier ecosystem? And so on and so forth, right? So I can add a lot of value in that conversation that doesn't come from understanding the technology, because I understand enough to be dangerous. But I'm not the smartest guy in the room. But I can provide some different sort of color, flavor, and opportunity that other folks don't see.
I want to highlight that. I think that's really important, because one of the things that we obviously talk about and we're challenged with in procurement all the time is, when we show up and we meet a business partner or a stakeholder, we need to be coming to them with value that gives them a reason to continue to engage with us.
Right.
And when we think about innovation, oftentimes they're the experts in their field in this area, so why would we know more than they do? But providing that additional context is really the layers that we can bring that they have no idea or they don't have the exposure to. As you're thinking, how are we creating value and showing up? Some really powerful ways that we can do that there.
Exactly, because we're providing context that they don't have, right? We're not going to have the expertise. I've worked, I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing, like uber genius types, right? So one of the guys I work with was instrumental in creating the Certified Data Analytics Professional Test. Yeah. This guy, when he walks in the room, the lights get brighter. He's got like a couple PhDs, and one's in math and one's in statistics. Most people can't even understand this guy, right? Because he speaks techie. He and I have worked together on multiple projects where I was able to take his 100 pages of technical gobbledygook and boil it down to 5 pages of executive speak. And so I work well with him to sort of translate him into a way that people can go, oh, that's how I can do that, right? And so that's another thing that you can do if you're a good business person and you're technical enough to understand the techies. Sometimes we can be the translator. And it's kind of funny, but I've had a lot of technical people that come to me and say, hey, I need to executize this. And it's kind of become an ongoing joke, but I know how to make presentations that are going to resonate with the C-suite and other,
kind of influence and persuade,
right?
And help them commercialize their ideas, basically.
Exactly, and I can get stuff down to a picture and a few words that can really tell the story, and I also can do the whole inductive presentation thing. You start with, I want to do X. Well, if they say yes, you're done. Go away, right? Don't waste their time. If they don't agree, then you go through the process of how you got to X. And I can take it, these really complex things and boil them down to sort of, high-level talking points that get the meat of the technical stuff. And so together we can have those conversations where if it needs to drop deeper, I got the SME there, right? And that subject matter expert is going to be able to go as deep as you want, but I can hit kind of the most imperative, business value kind of conversation. And I do that with suppliers as well. And it's kind of a nice function. And most people I meet who are really good at procurement kind of intuitively get that. The people who are drawn to procurement kind of get that sort of mindset. And I think it's a really great way that people who are in strategic sourcing and procurement and vendor management can really demonstrate value by being a facilitator. Right? You don't have to own everything. You don't have to do everything, but you have to be able to have the communication so that party A can understand the value of party C, and then they can go work stuff out, and then we do all the the paperwork to make it happen. In
fact, trying to own everything, which I feel from my background, started in the automotive industry. that's kind of how we're taught. Is you had to own everything. You had to own the supplier. You had to own the touch points. You had to own the process. We just get in the way then, and you turn off the business rather than you want to, kind of facilitate the conversation and facilitate essentially the shared creation of value. I know that's kind of sounds consulting speak, but that's what we're trying to do at the end of the day.
Well, but I think it's real though, because if you think about it, a lot of times you have decentralized procurement because the business wants to drive everything, and they just want us to be paper pushers and maybe risk managers from a contractual perspective.
Or when it goes wrong, they want to be able to pick up the phone and get you to fix it.
Yes, and like I've got it's kind of a joke, but it's fun. I've got a picture of a recruiting poster from Star Wars. It's a picture of Darth Vader, and it says "Your Empire needs you," and it's kind of the Uncle Sam needs you as a joke. Well, I kind of joke that Darth Vader is my negotiating mentor, and people find that amusing. I can actually do that if I have to. I very rarely do, right? It's usually about having that, value-added conversation and so on. But every so often, we have to be the bad guys. Yeah. Okay, great.
And the business loves that, because then we're the ones that the supplier hates.
Exactly. But if you think about it, it's kind of like, so I'm a big football fan. My son played in high school and college, and I've always been around it. And when you look at in the NFL, football players have an agent who negotiate with the general manager for the team, so that the player and the coach aren't involved in those acrimonious conversations. They can get along. So in some cases, procurement is there to be the bad guy so that we can negotiate that tough deal and get the protections and safeguards in place, so then now the supplier and our business partner can go and make wonderful innovation together, right?
There's no bad blood. It's interesting. Like we have so we're here at ProcureCon, and tomorrow I'm speaking just on a negotiation workshop. And one of the things that I'll be making clear during that is the fact that you have to work with these people after you've negotiated with them.
Right.
And so it's really easy to forget that. And so you're in the moment of basically what can be a tough negotiation.
Right.
But you don't want to damage the relationship, so then you can't work together afterwards.
Absolutely true, and especially if you're talking higher value, innovation, vested type deals, those kind of things. If you're doing that, Darth Vader should be locked in the closet somewhere, right? Now, if you're doing a commodity deal and it's really you're buying paper clips or something,
you're okay, phone him and bring him out.
Yeah, maybe that's the right time, right? But you really don't want to be the bad guy. Most of the time. Sometimes it's appropriate, and actually knowing when is an important thing. But that's one of the values we provide, is we can be that kind of insular barrier to make sure that the company's protected. We get a good deal in place. The hard conversations happen, but the people who have to get along and work together are sort of on the sides of that.
So I want to wrap up with just a question about supplier management. So we've done the deal. Your contract is signed. It's easy for us at that point in time to say, okay, my job is done. Show me the next sourcing project. Hand over the contract to the business. Maybe you help them implement it a bit, and you're on your way for the next 3 years.
Right.
But this is where the magic happens for me, and the innovation is continuous improvement. So as soon as you're inking that deal, we should always be looking forward to, okay, how am I going to make that better? And I think we miss that oftentimes. And it's not necessarily because conceptually we don't get it, it's just maybe because we've got a ton of other projects to go and source.
Yeah, well, think about it this way. If you're a buying organization, you would never want a sales team to come negotiate a contract with you and then throw over the wall to some ops group who's going to deliver the service, who wasn't involved, doesn't know what's going on. Yeah. Yet we do that all the time on the internal side, because we throw the contract over the wall to some governance team, right? Well, I was actually able to convince our leadership that the governance team needs to be part of the sourcing office. So fortunately, we don't have that issue, because in some cases it's same person, different hat. Other cases it's it's at least same organization. But you're right. I mean, there's two things that really are just absolutely paramount when it comes to good supplier management, vendor governance, whatever you want to call it, and that is value leakage. So did you actually get the deal and the value you expected on day one throughout the life of the deal, 3 to 5 years, whatever it is, or longer? And two, innovation and managing when and what should that innovation be. Yeah. I mean, so for years, I had a gain sharing and incentive clause that I wrote, two different clauses that I wrote back in the 90s. And for like the first 10 years we had those, I think we had one supplier that actually did anything. Because they'd come in with an idea and we look at it and go, yeah, that doesn't work, right? And then they'd come up with another idea and we go, yeah, no, that doesn't work. And eventually they'd stop bringing ideas, right? That's not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is, yeah, you need those clauses because you need a way of implementing contractually, but it's really part of the governance process. Once we now have governance tied in with sourcing and procurement, now all of a sudden you actually can make that clause real because you have real people having real conversations and going, hey, you know, I noticed this thing, and how about if? And I'll give you an example of that. So this isn't an example from where I work, but I thought it was awesome. There was a guy from AT&T who was out to a company that they do like, you know, the materials you put into concrete when you pave a highway and stuff. And they had these giant silos of stuff, you know, all these raw ingredients that they pull together to make their concrete and other stuff they sold. And he happened to show up at a time when it was during a thunderstorm. And as he's driving in and going to the office, he looks up and there's this dude in a yellow parka climbing around on the top of one of these towers in the middle of a thunderstorm, which is probably not safe. And so he goes in and he goes, well, what is this guy doing? He's like, oh, he's got this big cord he drops down to find out how much raw material there's in there so we make sure we don't run out. Well, and the guy started thinking. He goes, well, you know, we have this GPS thing in our phone. So he comes back with an idea of this little float that has some of the guts of a cell phone in it, which basically measures how high is the stack of stuff in the, you know, in the storage tank, and it's linked back into their ERP system so they can order more. So you got now min-max and automatic ordering, right? So it's this like really cool innovation, which is basically taking a cell phone, modifying a little bit, slapping onto a float and dropping into a tank, so people aren't, you know, out in the middle of a thunderstorm trying to measure if they got material or not. Awesome innovation, right? Just happened to be somebody, right place, right time, looked at, and I saw a presentation on this, which is the only reason I know about it. I had nothing to do with it personally, but I remember afterwards thinking, that was really cool, right? Because it was a natural adjacent, like, hey, we could do that. And, you know, I care about my clients' people not getting fried from a lightning bolt. And, you know, so it was a massive win-win. And it was like, wow, that's pretty neat. But what it says is this guy understood the business in a way to say, hey, I've got this thing I could design differently to go solve an unmet business need. That's the powerful conversation to have. And, you know, you come in and you propose something like that, well, only a fool wouldn't take it, right?
And what's really interesting about that, too, is how it shows that, you know, where you look for innovation doesn't just happen like in on TechCrunch or in you know, so industry journals or whatever it may be. Innovation can just be the use of a technology that has existed for years and years and years, and you're giving a new application, just, again, depending on what your business need is.
Absolutely. It isn't necessarily something that's like what we started with, right? It's a way to solve an unmet business need. It doesn't have to be a new piece of technology. It doesn't have to be a new process or tool or whatever. It just got to be used in a different way, right? Because if it, you know, otherwise you already would have solved it. So that's the thing where the better you understand how the business makes money and what drives risk for the business and you know, critical things like that, the more easily you can create innovations, or if they're presented to you from your suppliers, you can identify innovations. Exactly. And so, you know, if you're the sales side, know the business. Right? If you're the procurement side, be that facilitator to understand, I know the business, I know my supply base, and I can tell when they're bringing me something that is meritorious and should go to my business partner versus, come on, guys, really? You know, no. And we have those conversations all the time.
Well, Lawrence, I know it's about time to wrap up. I have one final question. I always say it's the easy question. If listeners would like to connect with you, they've heard the pod, they'd love to just get in touch, you know, what's the best place for them to go?
Well, that actually was an easy question. Here, I thought you were setting me up.
No.
LinkedIn's probably the easiest. It's Lawrence A. Kane. So there's a Lawrence Kane who's a Zodiac Killer suspect. That is not me. He has a different middle name, and he's older than I am. So Lawrence A. Kane, and you can find me on LinkedIn. You can Google me. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
So I will include the link to your LinkedIn profile to make sure that everybody is following up with the right Lawrence Kane.
There you go. Awesome.
I'll put those in the show notes, and those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. Lawrence, I just want to thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your experiences and just for joining me on the pod today.
Thanks, Phil. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Hi there, I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.